And we were recording. Okay. So, FORTIUS podcast, Titans of Throws, Legend series. I got Kevin McMahon, one of the kind of original OGs, I think, and probably mentors for myself. Thank you for being here. A hearty welcome. Coming in as like the newly anointed godfather of FORTIUS performance after that just absolute badass logo you did. Thanks for being here.
I am super happy to be here and to talk shop and talk about life, hammer throwing, mysteries of the universe, whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah. All of those things are pretty beautiful in my opinion. So we were kind of like in the whatever Zoom calls it, the green room or whatever prior to that. And it was a rush to hit record because it was amazing. Let's touch on that again.
Yeah, so I was recently kind of introduced to this whole concept of the second mountain, and the general idea is that, and I think this pertains particularly to athletes, that you sort of have this first mountain that you're trying to climb, some goal that you're trying to achieve, and it might take a very long time, but hopefully you achieve it. But there's this critical moment when it's over, like the Olympic Games are over, and there you are, and you've done this thing that you've always looked forward to, but now it's in the past, and you find yourself in a valley. And the idea, and I think the analogy is perfect because of Mount Olympus, but the idea is basically like, well, what do you do then? Because you've been to the mountaintop, and it's exhilarating, and it's thrilling, and it's self-defining, and all those things. But then you're in this valley, and it can be really rough. Like I told you earlier, I don't know a single Olympian who didn't go through a rough patch after the games. Like, it's just such a peak moment. But it's that redefining yourself and finding a second mountain, finding a way to give back, finding a way to use your platform to help others, to better the world. And sometimes that's an even steeper climb, but in the end, it's more rewarding than the first one. Like to some extent, I feel like
that, right? Like the more rewarding part. I don't know, because generally speaking, like when you're Olympian and you're doing those things, like you're younger, and the more narrow-mindedness, I guess, not that that's bad or anything, it just kind of is when you're younger and an athlete and going after the Olympic Games. And, coming to the realization afterwards that life is bigger, it's grander, it's more than hammer, it's more than even track, it's more than even going to the Olympics, you know what I mean? So like my personal experience there, absolutely, you know what I mean? You spent all that time. So 2008, shall we say, should have made the team, right? Came in ranked first and completely bombed, right? Go to Kamloops. So that's another 4 years of training just to try to make the team. Make the team after having just an absolute wonderful 2011, throwing really far. And then I start throwing really shitty. But the point is Brooklyn was born, my daughter, in April of 2012, months before the Olympic, right? And the games are the games. That's whatever. But after the games, it was like, I feel like it was a double whammy of just like, now what? And I remember, I know I spoke to you in that time. I spoke to a couple other people, and I forget who it was, and they were just like, "Oh, you got that Olympian depression." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like,
no one really does it.
Like, yeah, it tends to happen with your first Olympic Games. You go to the Olympics and spending all of this time, and then it's like, well, now what?
Yeah.
And that happened to me.
Yeah. And then if you're young enough, you feel like, well, I got to go back up the mountain. I got to like throw it in reverse and climb up that same mountain. And that I found the second one harder to do, because now you got to do it again, and there's so much expectation. Now you have to wait that too, instead of like I'm hunting something down for the first time and I can kind of sneak attack this thing. Now everyone's like,
Yeah.
well, of course you have to make it, otherwise it's failure. And you're like, well, I don't see it that way, but you're under that kind of pressure. But at some point, yeah, you can't keep making the Olympic team. So finding, once you get to that valley where you're like, okay, I can't climb that Mount Olympus anymore, finding something that's has a bigger, broader impact. And I think that's what this FORTIUS idea is all about, and why I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I kind of started calling it a universe, not for any other reason other than I feel like there will be many things under the umbrella. So, training and mindset stuff and performance coaching and actual like sports stuff versus
Right.
actual just people living life, merchandise. And anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, like I see it as a kind of bigger, broader concept and something to give back in a way that I don't think has really been done yet. You know what I mean? Like the internet is the internet and it's this amazing thing, but there's still like fairly pretty pocketed training ideas or whatever, right? Like it's I'll hear people right now and usually through other people and they'll talk about like say the training that I did with Dr. B or whatever, and like it's this big mystery. It's not a mystery. And I actually thought I was very open about it in my old blog, you know what I mean? And it's just one of those things that I really like to dispel, and not only for myself but everyone. And in doing so, I think we all benefit. Like for speaking about the sport, specifically.
Right. Yeah. And the thing that I'm excited about is the by extension, these principles that you learn in this very niche, narrow arena of the hammer, like by extension, some of those habits you have to build to be good in that domain of life, by extension, actually help you succeed in other domains of life. If you're willing to see them for what they are, so that to me, that FORTIUS concept is a mindset. You don't have to be a hammer thrower. You don't have to be super into Olympic lifting. You don't have to be a strength-based athlete, but a strong mind is going to serve you in whatever you're up to. Like as a parent, as a coworker, as just a human being.
Yeah, human being. Yeah, I think that's kind of it's I don't know, inferred, I guess, how I feel about coaching in general. And as amazing as it is, I think I put a little bit more emphasis on, again, that mindset part, because for the most part, there's probably negligible differences between training this system or training that system. You know what I mean? So I find myself being like, I don't really care how you train. I don't care what events you throw. I mean, I do, but like, basically what I'm saying is, like, at the end of the day, like what I'm caring about is what you do with that mind, because that thing is going to be the make or break between whether you're going to be as successful as you want to be or not. Not if you're training with this coach versus that coach. I don't care. Just go train. Like, that's the best part,
Right.
So let's rewind, because we just kind of hopped right on in there. Hammer. I don't know how many people are going to understand your 79.26, your PR 79.20.
260 in feet. Yeah.
It's so epic. And your body weight was what, like?
So I fluctuated. I was a whopping 215 to like 220 at the max. We're talking like with my shoes on, and like I would do that stuff. I would like weigh in with like all my gear just to like make myself feel like I was bigger than I was. But so like a 40 whatever, so 260, probably a little less than 220 pounds.
I mean, that's crazy. I mean, that's absolutely best pound for pound in the US, and it's got to be at least top 5 like ever. So I think, right? Because like,
I mean, to me, like
Sergey and Koji are the only other ones that come to mind. Koji was 214 at his PR, and Sergey was, I don't know,
I think he
I
was a
don't
little
remember.
bigger than that because he's taller than
Yeah.
me too. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. He did tell me he once he was in Doha and it was super hot and he like leaned down and he still threw like 80 meters. So yeah, I think Koji is probably pound for pound. Yeah, like he's probably the model of the most efficient technique.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, yeah, no, that is like a phenomenal thing what he was able to do. And then yeah, there's a few others. But yeah, it's funny because I knew I was never gonna be huge. It's actually a funny story. I was training with Mac Wilkins and Ed Burke, and I wanted to be a discus thrower like really bad, and
Really?
yeah, like really bad in high school, and so I'm you know the skinny left-handed kid. I'm like 170 pounds in high school, and finally like Ed Burke comes over to the discus group and he's like, "Listen, son, like you're never going to be 6'5" and you're never going to be 250, but you could be world class in the hammer throw." And it was like I just needed someone who had done it to tell me it was possible.
Yeah.
And I had seen him carry the flag 2 years before, so I had like a huge amount of admiration for this guy. So when he said it, it was like it had already happened. It was like, I am now a hammer thrower, and I had never picked it up. I was just, he defined me in that moment.
You haven't touched it yet.
No, like I was literally like,
Wow.
okay. And, I kept throwing the disc and I was okay. But, from that point on, I was full blown the hammer thrower. And yeah, I was really shitty at it at the beginning.
Like all of us, let's be
like
honest.
terrible. Like fell down my first throw. People are laughing at me. And it was like, all right, we'll see about this. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was like the best thing that could have happened. Like, I don't know. Like I spent a lot of time thinking about like the different factors that actually equate to performance. And like a lot of people simplify it to like your physical, whatever, the physical qualities you have, strength, height, and then like the mental side. But like to me, there's a super huge third component, and that's the emotional component.
Yeah.
And I think it's different than your mind, because your mind is like what you know. Like I can learn technique, I can know technique, but like the gunpowder, the motivation to train and to learn and to work harder, like that's not just like your intellectual knowledge, that's something different. And to me, like that's the secret. Like if there's a secret, that's the secret. Like being highly motivated will force you to do the training, will force you to learn more. So that I spend a lot of time thinking about that emotional component, and honestly, like for me, that's the universal that I see in every great athlete I admire or every Olympian I know, like has a backstory where they don't have a goal. They've got something to prove. Like they are out to prove something. And that's different.
And I feel like among that, it's usually to themselves. It's not a I'll show you kind of thing.
Yes. And I think there's a distinct difference between like, I'd like to lose 5 pounds. Like, okay, yeah, maybe a lot of people want to do that, but do you have something to prove? Because if you do, you'll do it.
Yeah.
Or I want to throw this or squat that. Like, yeah, everyone would like to, but do you like, are you out to prove it? That's a big deal.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like it definitely draws a distinction and I guess creates a drive out of it as opposed to like a wish or a want.
It doesn't have to be like a mean-spirited thing. Like, that doctor told me my career is over, I'm out to get him. Like, that doesn't have to be that. It could be just to yourself. Like, against your doubts. Like, I want to show the best part of me that I know I can do this. Like, and the motivation can switch. Like, I remember a doctor did tell me my career was over. I remember people telling me I was too small. And every step of the way, that was the new fire I needed for that particular year. Like, you could talk to Adam Nelson, and he's had a couple really great stories of people who basically just counted him out. And he just, and he can literally point to the moment. He's like, oh, Thank you for saying that, because now it's on.
He's the next one on, by the way. For all you FORTIUS listeners,
Dude,
Adam's
like, I
next.
think honestly, like if we're gonna talk about the emotional component, he is the exemplar. Like I like no other human being I know. Like he didn't care what people think. Like he was gonna go to a primal place where he could pull something out of his body that a normal person couldn't, because they'd be afraid of what people would think. They're like, oh well, I'm a little scared how people might judge me if I yell and scream and like act a little crazy or am a little
Yeah.
crazy. Like, and
Yeah.
because it's like their sense of decorum holds them back from what they could do. And he was totally uninhibited in a way that I had never seen before or since. And it was super inspiring to me. So I think in that domain of the emotion, yeah, no one's done it
I think
better.
now you're getting into some stuff that I'm pretty fascinated about lately. And I think primal is a really good word. And for us to be doing things that are, ancient weapons of war, it should be pretty primal, right? It should be like you get in and you just kind of react. That's why I'm not a very big fan of like, teach this, do this, remember this. Like at some point, yeah, think about those things and kind of understand those things, but that shit's got to turn off and you
Right.
just got to react and you got to go and you got to do.
If you're thinking,
And
you've already lost.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, and I think there's a lot to do. Throwing, okay, let's just say like our society, culture, whatever word you want to use, but also within track and field, and then even further also within throwing, it's pretty judgmental. Now, a lot of my opinion, a lot of those judgments kind of come from, what people think should be
Mm.
for this particular reason versus that particular reason, right? They think this equals good, therefore you should do this. And I think a lot of, and we've all done it. I've done it, and it's taken however many years to kind of strip all that crap away. But as those things get stripped away, you just stand more confidently. You just do, and I
Yeah.
don't think it's not really, you know what I mean. You're not doing, psychological exercises in
Yeah.
homework. I mean, you can, but like it's more about like, yeah, no, screw that, I'm good.
Yeah. It's liberating to free yourself of the burden of others' expectations of how you should
Yeah,
behave. And
right.
for me, it's like, if you think about it, like 99% of human evolution, something like that, we were hunters and gatherers. Like all of us are alive because somewhere deep in our ancestry, we were really good at hunting and fighting.
Yeah.
And if we weren't, we wouldn't be here. Like if right?
I
Like
like
those
to
people
say like back in the past, there's just badassery. So like
right, right. And so
what's
each of
your
our
excuse?
ancestors
Like
go like somewhere in each of our ancestry, we have a super group of badasses.
yeah.
And it's in you, right? And it's part of our DNA. Like we are still that same animal that survived in the wild. And society doesn't give you a forum for expressing that in any normal way except for athletics.
Yeah.
And particularly throwing, where you can be as primal as you want. And so I think it's not only like a super healthy thing, but like there is a sense of like, this is at my best, I felt like I was doing what God made me to be. Like I was doing what God designed me to do in that moment. Like that's how transcendent the experience was. Like that was my form of prayer. It was my way of connecting with the universe. And it was
Amen to that.
deeply rooted in my being. And that's why I think I could compete, right? Because I didn't care what people thought. I acted slightly crazy, but I knew I could take on, guys who were way bigger than me, who were maybe a little bit like, a little bit more caught up
Yeah.
in being judged and all that other BS.
That component is a strong one. And again, that's why I talk about the brain so much lately, I think. So you started, who'd you say, Ed? No, not Ed.
Yeah, Ed Burke.
It was that. Okay.
Yeah. So he and Mac Wilkins had this camp. I mean, looking back, it was just an amazing thing. So, like right after the '84 Olympic Games, a bunch of Olympians, particularly Ed Burke and Mac Wilkins, said, "Hey, we've got all this experience and knowledge. It's time to give back." Like it was their second mountain. It was their way of going through their hero's journey and giving back. And so they just coached kids for free on
Yeah.
on a Sunday. You could go to San Jose City College, where the Bruce Jenner Classic used to be, and get coached. And then it moved to this area of San Jose that was designated for a freeway, and it was all weeds. And the city basically said, until we make a freeway here, you can throw. And it was crazy because you could go out there on a Sunday and it would be like world record holder, three-time Olympian, American record holder, some crazy dude from Germany who throws 80 meters, like, and all these people from all over the world were training in this completely like slapped together facility. Like the poles that they used for the cage, Ed Burke went to the city and said, "Hey, what do you do with the poles that people hit? Like the light poles,
Oh yeah.
like the bent light poles that can't be used." And they're like, "They're just sitting around." He's like, "I'll take them." And that was our cage. Like they literally were like poles that cars had hit. I mean, he was, yeah. And a number of kids got full rides, or, you know, Pope Troy and I made the Olympic team, but there was a whole generation of kids that benefited from that.
See, and I think this gets kind of talked about a lot, especially, you know, at big gatherings of throwers when there's libations. And I want to see that happen again, but the way things kind of just are, I don't know if we will. Like, and honestly, if there's anything that, like, if I could just say right now, like, that would be, you know, a gift that I would like to give back. It's something like that, where
Well, I think Patty
all of
McGrath
these
is,
pros and
yeah.
big people.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
Patty
and that
McGrath is doing it. I think he saw that model, and he and I have been friends since high school.
yeah.
And he, you know, talked to Ed. He, you know, he knows that story, and I think he saw that and said, "Yeah, like this is certainly doable." And he worked his contacts, and God bless him. Look at all the success he's had, and
Yeah.
yeah, so it can be done.
Yeah, we need some more things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
And, you know, yeah, I guess he would be one of the few. Like, there's a couple in, you know, in Georgia, Mike in Georgia, and
Right.
um, I guess out in Idaho, they're trying to build something like that as well. But I guess it just needs time, right? But there's definitely
support.
the interest
Like,
there.
yeah, USA
Yeah,
Track
and
and Field could back that up, and I mean, look at what he's able to, you know, do with the limited resources they have. You know, I just, if there was a network of those and a summit where coaches could exchange information openly, because, you know, like I saw from your last one with Sergey, where you talked about how open it was, how the coaches
Yeah.
really shared information. We could do that. We could certainly be doing that, and this is a big part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Because and that's another point too. Like, because in the end, it's not really that different or special. when as a I don't know, like, to the contrary of coaches who want to be closed off about it, I guess is why I say that.
Right.
So, like,
Right.
you know, there's minor variations, and then there's the experimentation, but for all you
and that's
know,
just fear. That's just
yeah,
people afraid that, you know, they're going to give away some secret sauce, and that's not what it's about. It's about everybody helping each other. You know, all ships rise together.
Yeah, and like and that's it too, and it's pretty. I find a little bit of humor in it, only like with no judgment or anything, but I find a little bit of humor in it. I'll talk another minute about it. Because, like, when I encounter those kind of coaches, like in North America, or honestly anywhere, I won't even single out North America, and it's like, you know, you guys have no idea how much experimentation like the Eastern Bloc did. Like, I guarantee you they've done what you think is super special 20 times over.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that, and it's, you know, and there's 20 books on it in 5 different languages that none of us can speak. So it's like it doesn't exist. Well, no, it does exist. It's out there.
Yeah.
But in the
Yeah.
interest
Actually,
of sharing and talking about it, yeah, I'm with that. I just, yeah, I'd like
when
that.
I was at the Olympic Training Center, one of the first things I did, I went to the one sports scientist they had on staff, and I said, I want everything you can find from this guy Bondarchuk, everything.
Yeah.
And at the time, you know, there were all these academic journals, and there was actually a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
Not all that had been translated, but I read literally everything I could get my hands on, and I was shocked at like how much was being shared. And this is like during the Cold War, you know, like if they're willing to share stuff then when it really was like supposed to be secret, and he's publishing it to an international audience, like if he can do it, you know, of course we should, right? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Anyway, yes.
Yeah, and he's a good example, because I think right now, anyone right now like listening to this podcast can probably buy, I think he's got 4 books available. But my man, he's written almost 50 books. It's just there's only 4 that are like in English or, you know, French or something, right? Most of them are just in Ukrainian. So if anyone's listening to this and knows Ukrainian and wants to, you know, a job translating, I'm sure he'd be like, yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What are you up to now? You're in California.
So my second mountain. I've been teaching graphic design at a high school, Bellarmine here in San Jose, for 20 years. I do a ton of freelance work. Go new FORTIUS logo. But yeah, I do a lot of motion graphics, logo design, character design, illustration. And you know, the funny thing is, like, I see ways that the life habits I got from throwing translate into all of it. And I do occasionally bring that to bear when I'm teaching. But like an example I shared with some other designers last week, I said, look, like, you probably think I'm a little crazy because I've done like maybe 30 different variations of this particular logo over the years for Design Dojo. But the fact is, like, I learned as a hammer thrower, like going out there every day and experimenting, like today I'm going to try this and see if it works. And then the next day I'll try maybe a little something else and see if that fits in the puzzle. Like experimenting is how my brain works. And so as a designer, like ideating like hundreds of times is like, that's just, I think, the natural way to get better, because that's what I did as a hammer thrower. And so, you know, there's an example of a life habit from sports that can translate naturally into life, because it's an intellectual curiosity, right? And a constant desire for, you know, Kaizen, like continuous improvement, like what else could I do, you know? And if it wasn't for hammer throwing, I probably wouldn't have that mindset.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, because it's choosing the route of curiosity versus essentially like, this is one thing that kind of works, and trying to ride that out in a more negative / fear-based way. You know what I mean? And most things should be an experiment, and you're going to try some new things, some new ideas, some new feelings, and being able to ride that out and also applying that to life versus, hey, here's that one thing that I did that worked that one time. Yeah. And I'm going to keep doing that. Right. And then, you know what I mean? And then you're singly focused, and it just destroys everything.
Yeah. And the feeling can change. Like all of us have a feeling we know we had when we threw our PR. We all do.
On a daily basis.
If it was as easy, like if it was just so easy, like if you could just like, I'm going to do it again. Like, and then you'd always be throwing that same mark. But your body does not work that way. And like, honestly, I think the challenge is when you're experimenting, being able to recognize like, what are the standard deviations? There's this guy that my dad is a quality assurance engineer. A famous experiment. This guy took a funnel and dropped BBs in the funnel, and he marked where the BBs landed. And they don't all land in the same spot because the funnel, there's slight little deviations.
Yeah.
And he basically said, like, look, there's a range here of unknown factors causing some different results. And the mistake people make is they're like, well, that BB didn't hit the middle of the bullseye. I'm going to move the funnel because I'm going to make this change because what I thought was working doesn't work. Like, they abandon it too soon. And so, like, there's this weird balancing act of like, yeah, you need to experiment, but at some point you have to recognize, like, maybe you just had a bad day. Maybe you didn't sleep. Maybe you got in an argument and you didn't have the energy. Maybe you ate something weird for breakfast. Like, there's so many factors that go into a throw that, like, having one bad throw, you can't give up on that technique just yet. And it's like this weird judgment thing of like, but when do you? When is it not a standard deviation? When is it like, nope, this is not my throw. I gotta move the funnel. I gotta try something else. And that's hard. Like, that piece
it's so hard.
The judgment is super hard, right?
Oh yeah.
Because it's really easy to be like, the grass is greener. Like, I gotta move the funnel, right? Like, I gotta.
Yeah. No, this is like a perfect analogy because what you're describing right now is like a really great way to describe, training how I did. So a North American kind of style versus Dr. B. I mean, that's really it without getting into specifics of like, I don't know, the sciencey stuff, but like, that was it. Just observation and trying and then making sure observation and trying something else.
Right.
Yeah. That's the story. Thanks.
Yeah. But it's funny because like people will abandon a good coach, give up on a good weightlifting program. Like knowing how long to ride it out, like that adaptation phase. Like, I know when you were with Dr. B, like the first year, there was probably a lot of doubts. Like, your whole thing was being rebuilt from the ground up. And that trust that you must have had to say, like, I have to believe in this process. I have to, and it's going to take a lot longer than I want or that anyone expects. But boom, like, look what happened.
Which is funny because I was like fairly not arrogant. I was fairly just short of arrogant that I was going to PR my very first year. I was like, oh yeah, because I'd never been in a program or with a coach where I didn't just kind of excel. Right. And so I was like, no, I'm going to hit the ground running. This will be fine. I'll be good. The buy-in didn't I was just telling the story. The buy-in didn't happen like the 100% like, yeah, man, I'm yours. Just do whatever. It didn't happen until like 3 or 4 days before Mount Sac. So my first competition after already being with him for, by this point, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 months or however long it was, 8. And 2 days before Mount Sac, and I have a full training session, which that day was probably about 16 throws with the 16 pound. And my best throw that day was 59 meters.
Wow.
And it was like, and that was essentially kind of what we were waiting on in terms of, the tracking the adaptation, I guess. Right. And it didn't hit until that long. So it was a whole lot of, for most of those months, of just ups and downs, but there was no clear marker that says, okay, until 3 days before Mount Sac. And anyway, and so from that point on, it was like, yep, okay, we're good.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of faith, and thank goodness you stuck with it, man. Like,
oh man,
you could have hopped off and, then be kind of, then where it would have gone. So yeah, I admired that. I remember you throwing the weight indoors that year, and you'd already thrown like 84 feet. And you're like,
oh yeah, my first year because I was defending champ. So like I basically went back without touching the weight because Dr. B hated it. And but because as defending champ, like you go and you get you don't get paid, but you get like your reimbursement or whatever.
Right.
So I did that because we were broke. And I
Yeah.
needed money. I
No,
was like, yeah, man.
you're like, I
Then I
gotta,
think I threw like 19 meters, maybe
right.
less. I don't even
Yeah.
know.
And yeah, I'm sure people were talking and like, and then you're like, boom, 81 meters. How you like me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was yeah, I think a really valuable story, for all those athletes who are like, man, my coach is crazy and I don't think it's going to work out. Like if they have any track record of success, like you got to give them the benefit of the doubt. Like you got to try. But yeah, man.
I feel like that happens more. I don't know if that's a bias on my part, but like if I think about how, I mean, because I'm older, honestly, so maybe it's not a bias, but like when I think about when I was in my early 20s, like athletes tended to be with their coaches longer, it seems like, than they are now. An athlete would be with a coach now for like a year or two, and it's like, this isn't working, I'm out.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, do you?
Maybe it's an attention issue, like maybe it's the
That's
translation.
kind of what I think
They're on
about,
their
but it's
phones
like,
and
I
you're
mean,
like,
I don't want
yeah,
to.
yeah. No, I think, it's getting hardwired to switch your attention so easily. Like if you're constantly playing with different apps and whatnot, like if that's your life habit, like
Yeah,
writing something out for a couple of years, that's a big ask. I
yeah,
do feel like the camps were a little more defined back in the day too, though. Like it was like you weren't going to move from one camp to another very seamlessly because people didn't like each other. Like
yeah,
you're
yeah.
like,
That's true. There's a lot of
so
that.
it was like these are the defined camps and never shall they meet, like so uh so hopefully, and that wasn't a good thing. So who knows? Yeah, there's a few factors involved there.
Which is kind of funny because, and honestly, I probably had this personality because I did move around a fair amount growing up, but like I feel like I was cool with basically everyone because I was like, I mean, what's the big deal? Like the same attitude I have to this day, right? Like, I mean, I
Right.
love throwing, you like throwing, we're friends.
Right.
Isn't it as simple as that? You know what I mean? Like, I
Should be
don't
that easy.
understand. Like, what are we
Yeah,
arguing
yeah,
about?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Agreed.
When did Hammer like kind of take hold for you? Like, how long did it take before you were throwing and until you were just like, yeah, this is it?
My freshman year at Georgetown, Harold Conley came in, I think, at the very end of that. And I broke the American Junior record. And that's when I was like, okay, I was like, I mean, to be honest with you, like I grew up with the Guinness Book of World Records in my bedroom. And like in my little brain as a kid, it was like, well, like these are people who've done something. Like I got to start jumping rope. Like I got like whatever it is. Like there was something about that book that defined my worldview. And then in 1984, I was 16 years old, and I'm watching the LA Olympics, and I just kept hearing the announcers say like, so and so started when she was 14, and this guy started when he was 12, and I was like, dude, I got to find my thing now. Like, like there was an urgency to this. And so when Ed Burke carried the flag in 84 and it said Los Gatos, California, and I was like, dude, this guy's like my neighbor. And then he starts coaching kids. It was like all these dots start connecting for me. So I always wanted it, like even though I couldn't define what domain. But yeah, my freshman year when I broke the American record for juniors, that's when it kind of became real. I made my first team, the junior team, and it wasn't even a spectacular record. It just had been there a long time. And then it was like, okay, like I can see myself actually making the team. And it wasn't just a dream. It was like an urgency, like an obsession, like it was something I needed to prove to myself. And every time someone said I was too small, that was also a nice little incentive.
Yeah.
I remember warming up in 2000 outside the stadium to go in for the finals of the Olympic trials, and somebody walked by and they're like, decathlon? And I was like, man, come on. Like, it was just like, just like it was actually really great. It's like it's what I needed to hear. You know, it's like okay, like one more time, I got to prove this. Like, haven't I already told you? So every time
it was another competitor, like a hammer
no, it
competitor,
was
or
just like a
just a
random
random
dude
person?
walking by,
Okay.
and I used that as motivation. You know, like I liked being the giant killer. I did. Like I loved like walking in there, going like you guys who are like half a foot taller and 80 pounds heavier. Like, dude, let's see how this goes. Like that was a huge motivating factor for me.
I think that's really cool. Because it's still kind of, and I think that's what's so fascinating about hammer and why, like, I mean, you've got great athletes in all the events, of course, and everyone's an outlier, really, right, at the highest levels. But there's something about hammer as far as throwing events go. And I'm sure there's one other one as well, but you know, discus throwers, generally speaking, are fairly similar. Shot putters, generally speaking, are fairly similar. Javelin throwers are, runway models. They're all fairly similar. But like hammer throwers, you can just about be anything. You can look at any way. You can be any weight. You can be any height.
Yeah,
You know
there's a
what I
lot
mean?
more
And
range.
you can have major success and throw the thing far.
Yeah,
And
I think
like,
there's
and to
just so
me,
many
that's like,
yeah.
yeah, that's like an extra check mark. That's not to say that means better athlete, but there is something kind of special there that
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like a dude who's 5'8"
Right.
probably isn't going to be at least clean, probably isn't going to throw 71, 72 meters in the disc.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
one of those things.
Although I did take special inspiration from Tony Washington.
It's phenomenal, man.
If anyone on this podcast hasn't heard of Tony Washington, he's the most underappreciated thrower in the history of of humanity.
I agree.
The dude was a world champion through 72 meters in the disc and maybe 220, maybe 6'1".
Yeah.
And so like for me, that was like, hey man, if that guy can do it, like that, and I looked at, Sergey and a few others because Koji hadn't started yet, really. He was, he's like 5 years younger. But yeah, I did look to a few of those outliers. But yeah, there's something about the hammer because there are so many factors. But also, like, I think as a breed, like, there's a really strange mix of like, you have to have the intellectual curiosity. Like, there's a certain like intellect of like, you've got to be willing to be strangely obsessed with figuring the super complex movement out. And so there's that intellect that is sort of universal. Like you don't have a whole lot of like grunts, like just dudes who are like, I'm just gonna grip it and rip it. Like you could try, but it's not going far, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
There's a certain intellectual, if you talk to Yuri or some of those guys, like these are smart people. And so there's that, but also like a certain like, I don't want to say determination, but like the willingness to like experiment all the day long. And yeah, just a desire that I don't want to say stubbornness, but yeah, like, because I was terrible at it. And I mean, you were probably even more so than myself. I was good at other sports. Like I was good at football. I was good at martial arts. I was good at, other things I wanted to do. Like, I was good. I was never like the strongest and fastest maybe, but like I could pick up other sports, but this thing I was terrible at. Like, and that, like that sort of stubbornness of like, oh, like, dude, why do I suck at this one thing? And like the desire to get good at what I feel like is the most complex and challenging athletic movement, like that sort of determination, I think is something that we all hold.
That's kind of funny because like, like when I think about that, that's probably true for myself too. You know, I didn't do much baseball, but generally liked it because I always did have kind of a strong arm, and it was fairly accurate in terms of not pitching wise, but like, you know, anyway.
Yeah.
And then football, of course, and basketball was pretty good. Um, but then, and then sprinting, I was okay. But then also, like when I first started with like shot and disc, like I mean, it looked awful in those earlier years, but like it went really far. And so, but when I came to hammer, it was like, yeah,
Yeah.
like it was, and yeah, you're right. Like it
The
totally,
challenge of it.
there was
Yeah.
something that clicked in there that was like, why do I suck at this?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm gonna keep going here. I think
Yeah.
like for no other, I didn't even have that conversation. It was just something that kind of pulled, I suppose, is a better way to say it. You know?
Yeah. It's like you get called and you have to figure it out. You have
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
Man, we need like a Hammers Anonymous group or something because it really does sound like a problem.
Yeah. I've had similar conversations with Lance Deal and a number of our throwers like this. It's a weird thing where you're like, I'm not leaving until I figure this damn thing out. Like
Yeah.
today, like I cannot sleep until I figure this out. And that serves you well in the long run.
It does.
Yeah.
It's also
But,
probably why America probably has more 40-year-old hammer throwers than
oh
anyone in
yeah.
history.
Why would you stop? Yeah. Yeah.
Which I'm
Yeah.
knocking on the door of.
I still have dreams like all the time. All the time.
So what is that? What goes on there? Is it feeling picture?
It's the Olympic trials or the Olympic Games or the U.S. Championships, and I'm throwing, and it's on.
Yeah.
When Harold Conley was coaching me, he would tell me he was having dreams, and he was in his mid-70s, and his dreams were better than mine. He said he would have these dreams where he was bounding, and he could like do huge jumps, and he was bounding by his rivals, by his competitors, and he was looking down on them going, are you ready? I mean, that dude, he would, yeah, meet would be over and he would pick up the weight and throw it. But the 35 at 70, like he still was trying to figure it out and still like seeing ways to improve and still dreaming about it.
So I'm not so weird then, is what you're saying.
No, we are now. Not alone. Yeah.
So how about like when times kind of got rough, right? Like, I mean, we talk about how difficult things can be and how much patience we need to have, like kind of in the training process and also as a competitor. What did you kind of do or think about, or honestly, why don't you, if you don't mind, share a moment where it was like, you know what I mean? You're like on the verge of quitting that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, like, and you know, that's really what defines you is how you face life's challenges, right? You know, because handling easy stuff, like everyone does that, but like when faced with hardship, how do we respond? And I was lucky to have the model of Ed Burke and Mac and all these other Olympians who, you know, I studied them, like not just their throw, but like, all right, how did they get out of the car and walk to practice? How did they warm up? How did they respond when they had a bad throw in practice? I never saw anyone who was a great thrower throw a fit at practice.
Yeah,
I saw some pretty bad throwers throw fits when they get frustrated and like hit the cage and like you know, that stuff. And that contrast made an impact on me. Like, okay, like how do I deal with a bad practice? How do I deal with a bad meet? And what are the life habits that are going to reinforce eventual success? You know, like I look at Adam Nelson, he fouled out of like, I don't know, like 10 meets in a row at one point before he started winning Olympic medals. Yeah. Like, can you imagine like what kept him going that 9th and 10th time? Like the amount of faith in himself that he had to have to know that it was in him. It just hadn't happened yet. But yeah, I think that's a lot of that is where a coach comes in. You know, someone who's gone through some rough patches and say like, look, this too shall pass. Like it's going to get better. Believe in the process and have patience. And that took a while. Like when I was younger, yeah, I'd get frustrated at bad practices. Like if I had a great practice, my whole day was like rainbows and butterflies and the world was perfect. And it was like, I threw far today and everything was great. And then I'd have a bad practice and it was like, oh, like what is happening? You know, like I let it color my whole day until I had a good practice. And so like, it was everything. But I think with some maturity came some understanding of like, okay, yeah, you had a crap practice, but what's the best mindset to allow you to have a good practice the next time? Is it throwing a fit and getting frustrated? Or is it saying like, okay, maybe I really need to get more sleep. Maybe, you know, identify the real factors here, watch the freaking video, right? Like I watched video until I wanted to puke and I would, you know, learn a hell of a lot more there sometimes than by just throwing 100 times. So, yeah, I mean, having a close group of people, whether it's your coaches or your training partners who you can talk to and vent, you know, like we all need that. And this isn't just throwing, like we got to have people we can talk to help us navigate any challenge in life. And I think that I had that. I had good training partners. I had really good coaches between Ed and Hal. Like that was a big deal because they had both gone through really tough experiences beyond just even in, you know, throwing.
So did you have a moment either like where results kind of were just inexplicably gone, or was you know, environmental? Was there anything that like stands out in your career?
So I threw my PR in 1999 and I fully thought, because it was not a perfect throw. I could feel things. I can still feel that throw and I can tell you how I could have done it better. Like I know there was tension in my right shoulder and I'm left-handed. Like I know it. Yeah. So, you know, there's another inch there of radius I could have had. So I know I could have thrown 80 meters. Like I know it. And, you know, that knowing was like also like really exciting because it's like, wow, like an imperfect throw went 260 feet. I'm going to throw 80 meters. It's just a matter of time. And in 2000, I went back to train and I couldn't do what I did the year before. Like it just, my body was not responding to the same mental cues and feelings I was trying to replicate were not there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude. And the Olympic trials and the Olympics were really late because they were in Australia. So the Olympic Games were at the end of September. And so I peaked way too early, made the team, but I was done in June, like just done. Like my body was done. And I'm going to practice and it's all I can do to like throw 70 meters. And I'm like, oh, dude. So in 2001, I come back and I'm like, okay, like I got to figure this thing out. Like what happened there? And little pieces came back and I had a much better year, I think. But yeah, that elusive, and it seems like it should be so easy to just do it again, like just copy it, right? But life doesn't work that way, right? That was really, really tough for me, having to sort of find my new throw rather than just, I've revealed the great secret and now I've got it and I can just do it all the time. Because it doesn't happen. I mean, for some folks, maybe more easily, or they're able to do that. But I don't know if it was my brain or my body, but it was very hard for me to replicate.
I feel like so many people, most maybe even, like have those kind of stories. Like I know Judd's comes to mind, Um, his PR at Penn State 81-88. I forget precisely what was going on that day, but essentially like something was going on and he was like, oh, that's okay. Like I'll get it next time. You know what I mean? And never did. You know what I mean? And like,
Well,
and there's so many stories like that I've heard. I've kind of got one. Mine is more about like how far I was throwing and training and knowing what that 99% of the time correlated to, and then never got that. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think a big part of like, if we're to really hash out like what FORTIUS mindset is like kind of about, like it's definitely about releasing kind of expectations on what we think is supposed to happen. You know what I mean? Oftentimes it's
that's a big
not.
deal. Yeah.
And that's so hard for throwers.
Well, yeah.
And people, but
Yeah.
throwing, because, and I think what makes it hard is like we have a lot of these, standards or rubrics or whatever. And like, some people will look at 500-pound bench press means I should throw, I don't know, 21 meters, right? Well, yeah, but if you throw 60 feet, sorry.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah. In Buddhism, they say that, what causes a lot of our suffering is expectation.
Yeah.
We think this is how it should be, or this is how it should have gone. And thereby we cause our own suffering because life doesn't work that way. Like,
right.
And by abandoning sort of that future-based expectation and focusing entirely on the process, on the current moment, like that's where happiness and joy and liberation can happen. And I think that's completely applicable in throwing, where it's like,
yes,
you are going to throw your throw. It's going to sail and land somewhere, but all you can do is be a part of that miraculous moment of the throw as intensely and as dynamically as you can. Like, and the only secret that I found in that moment was getting past thought and focusing on feeling. And if you're really focused on feeling, you don't care about results at all, because result thinking is still thinking. But when you're feeling, like I am trying to find and replicate a feeling beyond language. And you and Sergey had a great conversation on that, on coaches are stuck with language and to describe a feeling, but if you have a different way of describing the same feeling, then do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, because the end goal is the feeling, and the language is going to be clumsy. It's never going to be a perfect representation. It's the finger pointing to the moon, not the moon. I love Koji's dad's line. I read an interview from him once. He said, after a while, words are just bothersome.
Perfect.
Like, you know what I mean? Like you can, when your son's basically throwing 84 meters, what are you going to say to him? That's not going to just distract from the feeling he's after.
Yeah.
Right.
And personally speaking, I guess we're kind of getting more into my personal coaching philosophy now, but like, I try, the way that I try to talk about it is as simply as possible. It's like this weird dynamic of like, you kind of do have to use a lot of words, at least, especially for like beginners.
Start, yeah.
And you know what I mean? And it's like, and it's the curve. And then, there's a point when like, then you can start using less and less words. But anyway, so I feel like it's one of those things where, what am I saying? I talk about hammer in particular the way I talk about it because I personally feel like everyone can have that feeling. So when I talk about that, I'm not saying this is how you're going to throw far. I'm saying you can have the feeling that I'm talking about as well, the feeling that I have. Now, and I had this brief back and forth with Alex Young on social media one time too. And his thing was like, well, your feelings and everyone's feeling, and I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you can have your own feeling, and that feeling is a very specific thing. You know what I mean? And everyone can have that. The thing is most don't. Also, the thing is, if you have a coach who knows what they're looking for, so like Bondarchuk and how he kind of taught me in a way, I don't even know if he knew he was doing it, is like that when that athlete is connected that way, it looks a certain way. So like me saying you've got that feeling doesn't mean you've got what I had, or you're throwing how I threw, or you're feeling what I felt. It means you're feeling your feel.
Right. And that's all that matters.
Right.
That's all that matters.
It's all that matters. I don't care if it goes 50 meters. I don't care if it goes 90 meters. The beautiful thing, in my opinion, is the feeling. Everything else, like, you know, if you throw hard, great. If you don't, whatever.
Yeah. It's a funny thing. Like I've tried to break this down for athletes where I say like, so at first you watch like a great athlete do their thing. So I watch Yuri Sadiq. I'm observing him. Now in my brain, I have to make words to describe what I'm seeing. And those words are actually representing a feeling. And then I try to like repackage that as my own feeling. But the shorter route, and the one that I think maybe helped me a ton, was there was this dude, Ladislav Pataki, who was a friend of Ed Burke's, who basically started Cybervision. And there was like,
I grew with him in junior college.
There was like no money in making a video about hammer throwing, but he did. And it was this looping hammer throwing of Yuri and Sergey to music. And this is before digital stuff. So I actually would sit in my room, because I'm left-handed, holding up a mirror, looking back, like, so that the TV was left-handed now, basically. And so I'm looking at this mirror, watching Sergey and Yuri over my shoulder. And I did that for hours, like every freaking day. And so there wasn't a language thing trying to describe the feeling. Like the whole point of that whole Cybervision technology was that by watching repeatedly, you can actually train your nervous system to sort of sympathetically or empathetically feel what they're doing beyond language. Like it's a more immediate path. And that's, I don't know if there's another human being who spent more time watching those damn Cybervision videos, because I knew I could watch that and go to practice and it would be a better practice. Right. I couldn't explain it all the time, but like that tech or that understanding of physiology and how we copy things we see, like that's probably how we learn to walk. That's probably how we learn to talk. Like to me, to watch someone do it with great excellence was my way of getting around language, which is in the end probably a stumbling block or something you don't need. Dan Lang talks about how in coaching you start with, you know, the coach is going to do all the talking and the athlete's not going to say anything. And then later there's dialogue, like, okay, well, what are you feeling? Blah, 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 right? But at the third stage is the coach is quiet and the athlete's talking. Yeah. And, you know, the coach doesn't have to say much because the athlete's doing the right thing and is only asking when he needs an answer, or like, what do you see, rather than interrupting their flow or what they're working on. And so there's this interesting shift over time. It's more
like questions or statements that leads the athlete to ask questions. You know what I mean? Like that's cool.
Yeah. And I saw that with some great coaches where they wouldn't say a word, or they'd say something at the beginning. They'd say, what are you working on? Because if you throw some new monkey wrench in there and someone's working on something else and now they're divided inside, and it's like, well, I was working on this, but now you threw that in there and now it's going to be all effed up. So yeah, I saw some great coaches say very little, and athletes would say like, do you see this, or am I doing it? Right. And there were practices where there would be very few words exchanged that were really good.
Which is like, I mean, and that's just cognitive, dissonance, you know what I mean? Like, and so if athlete and coach aren't on the same page, athlete's got its own idea, coach has their own idea. The practice is already basically done before it starts, you know what I mean? And I think that's why that's very important to kind of be on the same page, or at least kind of observe and feel out prior to barking out what needs to be done.
Right.
One way or the other. It's not just a coach thing, I'd say, but
Yeah. No, and I think that's maybe one habit I tried to pick up on as a coach was like, there's your physical warm up, but there's also your mental warm up too. Like when I was coaching at Stanford or at Georgetown, like it wasn't enough like, okay, here's our 15-minute warm up. It was like, okay, like I need you to not be in your calculus class mentally. I need you to not be thinking about the party you want to go to on Friday. I like, what can we do mentally to bring you to this moment, to abandon all other thoughts and really focus? And sometimes it was that conversation of like, okay, remember what we worked on last time? We're going to start off where we left off. And Ed Burke had this really great habit where he would ask you as you walked into the ring, what are you going to do on this throw? And you'd have to tell him. And if it gave accountability of like, well, I better see it then, because if you just go in the ring to throw, that's a wasted throw. That's a wasted throw. But if you have like the one thing I'm trying to do, I don't care where it goes, but did I do that one thing? And now the coach and the athlete are together on that. Like that's a big deal, especially early on.
Yeah, right. I'll go back to the cyber vision thing a little bit. I think often what either doesn't get talked about a lot or maybe gets lost in translation is when visual cues are used, so cyber vision in this case, to try to feel things. I think it tends to be like used in terms of what the body is doing. And it's like, well, this is what I see that their, left knee is doing, and it's driving into the ground, or like things like this that you hear, right? And like in the feel it should start with the ball, the orbit, and then it kind of everything else, I don't know, attaches is just kind of together. But like, and you'll hear that in conversations, and that's something that I'll try to be like, well, yeah, you're looking at the ball, or sorry, you're looking at the body, and that's something before I even knew what was going on, right? Me personally, people would talk about how good of an athlete I was, and how fast I was turning in the ring, and I knew like it was kind of a compliment, but like not really, and that's just kind of where my head was at with it. And then years later, it's like, oh yeah, well, A, you're looking at the wrong thing, and B, as I got better from say the 65 to 70 meter guy, when I was spinning around like a dervish, whirling dervish, I was turning slower when I was 77 plus 80 meters. Now, I mean, honestly, now that I say that out loud, honestly, like in video, it might not really seem that way, but in here, I was going in slow motion. You know what I mean?
Intention. Yeah. And that's a really interesting point. I remember talking to Yuri Sadiq about who's the dude the first guy, Alexei Zagorny, the first guy to throw 80 meters, and I asked him about him. He said, yeah, what he says he does and what I see him do in video are two different things. So he's like, I couldn't make sense of it because my thought of what he was doing and how he thought were totally at odds. And so he's like, I kind of had to do my own thing. But it made me think that Yuri had a great story, about like getting caught up in those details. He said he was at a sports scientist kind of whatever conference, and they're like, we analyzed your world record throw, and the angle of your foot on turn 1 is here, and like they're giving him all this data, and they like throwing all these numbers at him, and they're like, why on turn 3 was it more like this? And he's like, 86 meters. like you have no idea like how freaking fast and how much is going on. Like, I don't ever think about the angle of like, am I at 32 degrees or 34 degrees? Like these never come to my mind. Like, he's like, I know sports science. Like he, probably could do a lot of the physics. Koji could do, he's got a doctorate in physics.
Absolutely can, yeah.
When they're throwing, none of that's going through their heads, right? It's the feeling that they've found. But yeah, was funny to hear him say that, like, look, like sports science, great, but it's all about finding this feeling.
Yeah. And then, apply the sports science after the fact to
Right.
validate how awesome you are. That's what it should be for.
Right. Yeah. I want to get Yuri, actually, I need to talk to him because he told a story once about the boycott in '84, and this, us missing this year's Olympics made me think about him, and hopefully you can bring him on to tell this story. In 1984, on the day that he would have thrown in the Olympics, he went out and grabbed like an 8K and threw some ungodly distance that was farther than the winning throw in the Olympic Games. Like,
what was the winning throw in '84?
It's like 78 meters in 1984, and I think he said he threw like right at like 80 meters with an 8K, or maybe even farther. It was some ungodly number that, I don't want to throw a number out that might not be true, but it was better than the winning throw, and he threw it with an 8K, and he just wanted to show, like, I would have won that damn thing.
Like, whatever it is, like,
for himself, like, this beyond politics, I needed to know that he would have won.
Yeah. I mean, his 10K is, this might have been a different time though, maybe a little bit later or whatever, but his 10K is 70 meters. So it's like, or sorry. Anyway, yeah.
It's ridiculous.
That's all hearsay.
Yeah.
But yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, I should ask.
Yeah, it was a great story. I was like, good grief. Yeah, the dude, his throw haunts me. Like, I watched that world record, and you were going back to like things what we wish. And I've heard him tell this story twice, that he broke the world record, and then I don't know if it was Bondarchuk or somebody else said, look, you're going to get your bonus for breaking the world record. Don't throw farther. Like, there'll be other meets. And that way, like, with every new world record you break, there's bonuses. So he felt like he never really knew what he could have done, because the throw he took after that was only 2 centimeters less, and a lot of people say it was technically the better throw because he wasn't really trying his best.
He says I've heard him say that throw was better than the world record.
Right.
But again, it's like, it's centimeters, right? So wind, who knows?
And if that's him taking it easy, holy moly! Like,
right.
But that's that was a story that that throw haunts me. But I can imagine, like, he once said, I can imagine 87 meters. He's like 90 meters, no, but like 87 for him was like, I could see that happening.
That's funny. I thought, actually, no, this didn't happen. But Dr. B, he said there was a time like they thought for sure 90 meters was coming. And I'd have to ask Sergey for clarification, but I'm pretty sure Sergey threw 88 or 89 in training, and Yuri was like 87 or so. But the thing was, like, between the two of them, like when they were in world record shape, Yuri would, typically throw 82, 83 in these sessions. And Sergey would typically throw like 86, 87s in those sessions. But come the competition, when they're in world record shape, Yuri was throwing, his 86 and 85s, and Sergey was coming down. And so they were like, whatever. Wow. So like, like farthest throw ever, I think, is that Dr. B has seen, I think, is like 87, 79 or something like that. Wow. And so at that time he was like, 90 meters, sure. Like, we're going to hit 90 meters. And it just,
can you imagine? Yeah. My best training throw is 75 meters.
Your best training throw ever, 75?
75.
Dang.
If I was training over 70, it was on. Like, I would try to, a typical good practice was me just trying to consistently throw like 20 throws over 70 meters, like 71, 71, 72, 71. And then, I actually got this from Yuri Tom. I saw him throw at Mount Sac in high school, and he took 2 warm-ups, and all the Americans took like 12. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
some of them took just a shit ton of throws.
Exactly.
And I went up to him afterwards and I was like, and you know, he's like this giant bear of a human being.
Early.
And I'm like, why did you only take 2 warm-ups? And he looked super puzzled. He's like, I'm a professional. Like, why would you need more than that? And
right there, your hammer life is already like
and I'm
drastically.
like, oh, and you know, like for him, it was like, well, I'm going to get 2 warm-ups at the Worlds. I'm going to get 2 warm-ups at the Olympics. Why would I ever train my body to not be ready after 2 throws? And so for my training, I actually started adopting that where it was like, yep, I would do my warm-up. I would take 2 warm-up throws, and then throws 3, 4, and 5 were pretty hard. Like trying to train my body to be ready on throw 3. And then back it way down and throw it like 70% and try to peg the 70-meter line.
Yeah.
So that when a meet came around, it wasn't like, it was like, this is what I only do, is be ready on throw 3.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And like, I think most throwers kind of have like experiences like that where they kind of just kind of try to dial in, and the more dialed in they are, the better they'll be in competition.
Right.
I think
compete.
Like,
yeah,
right. Like, so like my personal story would be, I used to throw farther all the time, really, in training than I did in competition. And then, you know, you have that kind of year or whatever transition with Dr. B, and then my training throws started going lower and my competition throws started going higher, right? So like, you know, to throw actual numbers out there, my training best in Ashland was 79.60.
Wow.
I think my second to last year there, I don't think I threw that my last year. And my best for 4 or 5 years in a row was 75 something. Wow. Every year I got stronger, and for a couple of years, every year my training best got more, but I was still throwing 75 meters no more than 3 times a season.
Huh.
And yeah, with Dr. B, the farthest in training I ever threw with Dr. B was 78.40, and I threw 78 only twice, I think, maybe 3 times, 77 a bunch, but even then, those results never came when I was preparing for a major. It just happened to be, you know what I mean? Like maybe it was after a major or earlier in the season. When I was preparing for a major, the most I ever threw is in the 75s, 75 low.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you go to the major and it's like 79 meters, it's 80 meters, it's 70. It's great. It's a great feeling to like not throw far, you know what I mean? Like far, and then show up and it's like, bang.
Yeah. For me, I could not replicate the adrenaline, the again, going back to the emotional component, I couldn't do that in practice.
Yeah.
And in a meet, it was like the primal thing could kick in, like the fighting spirit, you know, like you're like, now it's combat, like now it's on. And in practice was just greasing the groove and creating a nervous system path for that to be ready.
Where do you think that's from? Like, do you have any ideas? Like essentially your emotional intelligence to be able to kind of harness that adrenaline on the day. Like, is there anything you can attribute that to?
Yeah, I mean, it got kind of extreme. I remember after one nationals, I went back to my hotel room and puked my guts out. Like it was just such a drop in adrenaline, right?
Yeah.
Of like I needed to pull this thing together in this one day because I was having I think that year wasn't expected to make the team and hadn't been throwing well. And I pulled it together for that nationals. This is probably like 93 or 4. And yeah, like I was like a complete mess. Like it could not function. You know, and you hear like Al Order having those similar things where he'd be like puking in the bathroom at meets, but every freaking time that guy could deliver, you know? And I didn't, it's a funny thing, but like my nervous system, like as a kid, like I'd get super scared before meets and like nervous, like like nervous fear. And then
Yeah.
it took a long time for me to go, no, this is a superpower. Like I can do things when I'm nervous that I cannot do normally. Like if you can tap into that adrenaline, like you hear all these stories about people lifting cars and stuff in like extreme situations. And I remember Ed Burke doing a talk where he brought in somebody to do a talk about that. Somebody who had worked with the Olympic weightlifters and talked about getting yourself into that psychological state of like absolute urgency and going way beyond what you think you're capable of. And that resonated with me. Because yeah, it was like, I could keep things pretty quiet in training and then get to a meet and it was like a totally different me. You know, like it was unchained, you know, like just like the other part, the primal part of me could finally come out. And I think if I did that every day in practice, I would just be completely burnt out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I've spoken about something similar myself, because like you calling it a superpower, like I think it's brilliant, because I mean essentially that is, in my opinion, what it is. Like I mean it's
as close as you're gonna get.
It's just energy, period. And then and now, you know, it comes like what we were talking about earlier with like words, and you know, you want to label it as this versus that. Like I mean it is just energy, you're feeling it. And either you can use it, if you know what I mean, if you don't try to attach it and say, oh, I'm nervous, oh God, like what if this happens, or what if that happens? Just use the energy, bang, it's done. You know what I mean?
And that's something I think young throwers don't realize is like even the best throwers in the world, like they not only get nervous, they want to get nervous. Like you want to feel that because now you know how to use it and not be afraid of it. And that took a long time for me, but like the sooner I could try to coach someone to like say like, we're going to go to this meet, you're going to be a little nervous, and that's awesome. Like I remember Ed saying to me once, we were going to nationals or something, and he's like, I'm super jealous. And I'm like, why? Maybe not super. He said like, I'm actually jealous, you know? And I'm like, why? He's like, and it had nothing to do with like throwing necessarily. He said, when you're competing, there's so much life in that moment.
Oh yeah.
Like just the ability to tap into that level of nervous excitement. We just don't get to do that very often in life. And to have a forum for that was something he really missed. And I think probably why he's, you know, every 5 years comes out and breaks world records. But yeah, like that, you know, making friends with your fears and letting them become your allies, you know?
That is so true.
Yeah.
I'll have to get him on. Well, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I'd recommend it.
Yeah. Most memorable moment, what you got?
Man, in what domain? Like there's definitely like moments where I could point to like that was a huge confidence builder. You know, there's definitely like favorite teams and trips. I'll give you one from Fukuoka. With the World University Games were in 2000 and well, not 2000, 1994 or 5, and I was seated like 10th. And like in the US, the World University Games are not a big deal, but like in Europe, they're freaking huge. And so like there were a lot of dudes who were like in their mid-20s, maybe even close to 30, competing in these things. And I'm like, what are you doing? And like, I remember, you know, this wasn't a hammer thrower, but someone else saying like, well, yeah, you sign up for like a one class of college and you compete in this meet because it's a really big deal. But yeah, there was like basically everyone who was going to go to the Olympic Games in 96 who wasn't Lance Deal and, you know, Heinz Weiss, who wasn't like in their 30s, was probably going to be at this meet. And so I'm seated like 10th, and I'm throwing like 71, 72 meters, but I'd thrown 73 or 4. And I just remember it being like my second to last throw. And I'm like, I'm so effing tired of throwing the same throw. And you know, I'd competed against these guys before. And I'm like, I'm tired of finishing 10th. I'm done with that. And I walked in and I was just pissed off. And I was like, I dug deeper into that well of adrenaline, and I ended up, you know, moving up to like 3rd. And, you know, I'm sitting behind like Balazs Kiss and like some Ukrainian.
Yeah.
And like all these giant dudes are like, what just happened? Because that was like a super ugly throw, but you just willed it out there. Like they're making fun of me. They're like, look at the very strong man over here. Like, what happened? And I eventually get knocked down to 5th, but it was way better than I was supposed to throw. And like for the rest of the trip, like every time at the cafeteria, the Russians are like joking about like, what just happened there? Like, like they had like nicknames for like, oh, look at the very strong man, because I'm like half their size. But it was like a defining moment for me of like, I'm just not going to lose to these guys today. Like, no, that's not happening. Like, I'm not okay with this. And I'd say that was a big moment. And then the other one that was sort of defining was in 1997, I won the US Nationals. And up until that point, I had never tried to channel the energy of the environment. Like I was very like, I'm here to throw my throw and I need to block everybody out. And so I've already won the meet. I've got my 6th throw. Jed, God bless him, takes his 6th throw. He doesn't pass me up. So I've already won and I've got one more throw. And I'm like done. I'm like, Puh. Like I'm thinking about like just going to the hotel and getting something to eat. But I got to throw. So I'm like, where am I going to get this energy from? So I give up some of that inhibition and I turn to the crowd and I, for the first time in my life, I'm like, I'm doing this, right? And I'm like, okay, like I need the energy from somewhere and I don't have it. And, you know, that at Indy it was packed. And so you got, I don't know, 10, 20,000 people clapping for a hammer thrower. And I'm like, crap, now I better do something. Like, so now I'm like nervous all over again, but I honest to God felt like it wasn't just me. Like I'm channeling some universal energy from this environment, from these people, and they're helping me do something beyond myself.
Yeah.
And I walked in and I threw 77.42, a personal best, with like, and at that point I thought it was done. Like, so that was a real surprise to me. And again, kind of a defining moment of like, I don't need to be scared of the environment and block it out and worry if people throw me off. Like I actually want to invite that energy in.
Good advice. Okay. So, the last thing I'll bother you with. So, the current group of, we'll be specific here, American hammer throwers, amazing, probably in terms of age and distance thrown, best in history. What advice, like what would you, if they're, you know what I mean, they're sitting in your office or room right there right now, what do you tell them?
I really like this latest group, and I think technically probably the best batch we've ever had.
Yeah.
I want to see what would happen given their technical abilities if they were able to go to that primal place where they're going to find a whole nother level of energy and force and distance. They're all really nice guys.
Yeah.
And that's great right before the meet and right after the meet, but I would love to see them tap into that hidden reservoir of primal energy and do something just ungodly amazing. You know, or godly amazing. I don't know what some. I don't have to bring God into this, but something just so far beyond what they think they're capable of by not being afraid of that huge reservoir of primal energy that is there waiting for them if they're willing to not be scared of it and not label it as a bad thing. So I think, like, honestly, like, I think some people see, like, because it in normal society, things like anger, they're not okay, right?
Yeah.
But if you're in a street fight, you better have that in you. Like, if you don't, the other guy does, you're gonna lose. You're gonna get your ass kicked. And in hammer throwing, like, you better have some part of that and be okay with it. It's not going to the dark side, right? Because in my head, that's what it was for so long, was like, well, then I'm turning into like Darth Vader, right? Well, now I'm using like meanness to throw farther, and that's not it at all. It's what kept your ancestors alive, right? It's that hunter-gatherer warrior spirit that's in you. If you're willing to not label it as something bad and willing to channel it and not feel bad about it, it's not personal. You're not like, you don't have to hate your competitors.
Yeah, that's
but
just
you don't have to, it's not against someone else. It's just pulling it out of yourself for yourself, right? It's feeling every time that you compete like you really have something to prove. And again, that could be to yourself, but like, that's what I don't see. I don't see like that sense of combat that made a difference for me.
Yeah.
And maybe it's there, maybe I don't, maybe, you know, I'm not at every meet. Maybe they're doing it, but you know, like what made Yuri and Sergey move the world record up, you know, and they were good friends. I remember Sergey or Yuri opening a letter from Sergey in Wichita, and they were like corresponding, like they were good friends, particularly later in life, I think, but they were also crazy rivals. Like,
yeah.
You can't tell me there wasn't something deep that didn't come out there, and thank God it did, right? That's a good thing. So that's what I would say.
Nice. Yeah. I kind of feel like throwing.
I wish I could, believe me. Yeah, me too.
All right, Kevin. Well, dang, man, again, thank you for coming on and sharing with me and everyone else that is listening. Thank you, listeners.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, just past a kind of beginning podcast milestone with 2,000 listens. So thank you guys. If you are enjoying what you're hearing, make some suggestions on some people, and like, share, subscribe, all that kind of crap. But Kevin, thanks again. Enjoy your day. Hope you're doing, you know, all right over there with the old Corona. So
yeah, we're inside.
Yeah,
we've had it for a long time.
All right, guys, and Kevin, we'll take care, man. I'll talk to you soon, I'm sure.
Great talking with you.
Yeah, man, you too.
Take care.
All right, bye.